Welcome to Reclamation. I'm Naomi, the founder and executive director here at BE, and we're going to have kind of a little bit of I don't know, Kat, a reverse interview in a way. I mean, the goal is always that these are more conversational. I mean, depending on the guest, I say more or I say less, depending on, just the dynamic and what information we definitely want to cover and get through. And so sometimes there's less of me, which is great, more of the guest, which is the point. And in this situation, Kat had reached out to me. And Kat, I'll let you tell a little bit about the story. But basically, Kat reached out to me and was like, I had this interaction. I don't know how I feel about how it went or what I said or what I could have done, or kind of like working this through. Like, basically, how do I interact with someone? How do I support someone? And, who has experienced spiritual abuse. And I'm like, you know what? This would probably actually create a really great resource for people so that we can refer them to it. All of you, watching and listening when this drops. So, like, why don't we go ahead and just record it? And so Kat has a series of questions that we're going to engage around specifically, and how do we support others? Like, how do we come alongside others? So Kat, I'll hand it over to you. And do you mind sharing? I think you've got one or two kind of just maintaining confidentiality, of course. So she's not getting super specific, but how does this even happen? What can this look like?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Naomi. And also I'm having weird connection issues. So let me know if I cut out or anything. But I'm really grateful that we are having this conversation today. I know that I'm not alone in this, in wanting to do life with other people, do it well. And obviously with the prevalence of religious and spiritual abuse, we know that we are coming into contact with others all the time who may be affected, that we would, not even always realize at first until having that conversation. Or we ourselves might be being, how do we protect ourselves as well if we have had that experience, as we're seeking to support other people. I'd had an experience, or actually two experiences, and one was actually with a family member who had been in this kind of situation, who had been in a cult for 20 years. And I kind of wanted to refer them. They were out of it, and I wanted to refer them to some resources like a book. And they just at the time were not able to receive that and said, no, thank you. And I totally got it. And we didn't really talk about it till later. They said, I think I'm in a better place now, which I really appreciated, just the update that they gave me. But then the other person was actually, because I'm doing my master's right now, one of my classmates. And we were just chatting a little bit about ourselves. And I don't know how it even came up, but I think maybe I shared that I was a Christian, and they had shared about being in a religious cult, growing up in one of those. And so at the time, of course I want to support them, and I'm wanting them to realize that's not Christianity. And so I think I had also tried to recommend a book for them, and really, again, politely declined that, and was not really ready to hear anything more that I, down that track. So we kind of shifted away from that conversation and just sort of focused on school and other things. But again, I don't think I'm alone in that. There's just this prevalence. And I think that it's important that we learn, we have such a great resource in you, Naomi, where we can I can ask you, for our audience as well, what was that healing process for you? It doesn't look linear. It doesn't look like the same for everybody. And how can you, if you were in that place where you just weren't ready to receive any kind of resource, how can we maintain this friendship? How can we, is it just, one day I will be able to offer that? So basically that's kind of why we're talking about this.
Right. And for those who are unfamiliar with Kat, it's possible that maybe you've seen her in some of our other videos. Kat is on our board of directors here at beEmboldened. And she also is the executive director of a nonprofit called Fierce Freedom, which works in the area of human trafficking. And so she is a significant advocate for the prevention of spiritual abuse as well as survivor support. So she does that through supporting beEmboldened, supporting me as an employee of beEmboldened, and just in her community at large. So anyone else who's like, yeah, I have run into someone, or I mean, any of us could if we haven't. I mean, so many people ran into me, right? And they didn't even know. And that wasn't
Yeah.
their fault because I didn't tell them. But you just never know when it could all of a sudden pop up, So before I launched beEmboldened back in 2020, I've mentioned before that I like reached out to certain people and I'm like, well, I don't want them to find out about this on YouTube. Like, I need to actually have the conversation and tell them. Relationally, that was really important to me. And they didn't know, like they may have known bits and pieces of things or like known something maybe was off, but there were some people that were just totally blindsided. They had no idea at all because I hadn't shared. And so I'm by no means saying like, let's walk around assuming everyone is like me. But you just don't know when it could come up. So I hope that this will prove to be a helpful conversation and an opportunity for people to kind of, take some things from it. And again, mark this as a resource. My hope for these conversations is that they do become resources. So when I don't have a resource I can send people, I'm like, well, let's create one. Let's do a video. Let's have a
Right.
conversation. Let's invite a guest on. And so just mark this for later. It might be something you can come back to if it's not applicable to you now, and you can come back to it later. So, Kat, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. Where do you want to start?
Mhm. Yeah, I get to interview a little bit today, Naomi, which is great. And I had actually kind of in preparation for this, I'd gone back and looked at the video that you had posted on beEmboldened's channel. I believed I was Christian, but I was actually in a cult. And I think, a lot of people have probably seen that video. And I think that you touch a little bit on your journey out of the psychological aspects of, and not just psychological, but just every aspect of growing up in this religious cult that you were part of. And so I would love for you to explain, again, for those of us who are not seeing the inner journey of others and maybe kind of at some point will interact with somebody that's kind of on their own journey. I'd love for you to share kind of what was that like for you to just journey out of this and maybe some of those stages. And that doesn't mean, again, that it's linear, but, kind of what did this look like for you? And then I do have a follow-up question that I was thinking as well.
I think about the stages, there's steps to trauma healing, and we'll hear about this in slightly different ways. So there's some variation out there, but I'm going to list off 4 and then break down the last one. And then I'm going to connect it to me personally to again give that like more, it's not tangible, but that more like tangible esque, a connection with it. So when we think about trauma healing, we have the initial acknowledgement, which makes sense. We have to actually know, like, acknowledge, okay, yes, I have experienced something that should not have happened. I had an experience that should not have happened to me, and I felt unsafe. I felt stuck, and this has now changed me. Trauma is a lot about the after effects, how it continues to impact our life, even more so ultimately than the event itself. Of course, you can't have one without the other, but it becomes a lot more about how it changes us moving forward. And that has systems, changes to our nervous system. It has changes to how we're able to trust and engage with others. And we can impact absolutely every aspect of our lives. And spiritual abuse is known to do that, to impact every aspect of our lives. So that acknowledgement is really important before we would step into having a sense of safety and stabilization. So I'm feeling unsafe. I'm feeling like the ground's been pulled out from under me. How do I now reestablish a feeling of safety, and how do I start to stabilize? And one aspect of that, to give an example, could be okay, for me to feel safe, I'm not going to walk into a church anytime soon. So that's a common example of what that can look like. To be like, okay, I'm removing that for the time being because I don't feel safe, and I have more of a sense of safety if I don't. So that could be sort of what that looks like. And then we move into the area of processing. So then we're starting, and all of this kind of overlaps with one another. And it's not like 100% linear, like, okay, I've stopped this, or I've did this and now I stopped and now I'm moving to the next. But processing is going to include really thinking back over what has happened, and not only that acknowledgement, but seeking a sense of understanding of like, what was that? Acknowledging that it was wrong, I have a lot of conversations with spiritual abuse survivors where there wasn't really this understanding of like exactly what was wrong and why it was wrong, especially if they're looking for like biblical backing and scripture's been twisted for them. It's like, well, is this actually wrong? And so going back through and making sense of all of that and being able to understand what was wrong and why it was wrong, what it should have looked like again, and why. And oftentimes using scripture for that for someone who is still desiring the Christian worldview aspect of the conversation. So that processing part, there's also the emotional processing that's going to go along with that intellectual side. And I regularly tell people cognitively, we're probably going to make it to a point before we will emotionally. Emotionally, we're going to take longer to feel the things that we're feeling and move along in that healing journey. And that's going to connect with this remembrance and grieving step. Grieving is a journey, and it is oftentimes overlooked when we talk about trauma, particularly when we're talking about spiritual abuse. Again, to hone it in more, we've experienced a lot of different kinds of losses, losses like worldview, losses like actual people, loss of a sense of community, loss of confidence in knowing who God is and what my relationship with Him is like, confidence in my ability to read scripture, loss of just day to day rhythms or weekly rhythms or annual calendar rhythms. I mean, there's just so much that gets messed with. And so when we're looking at grieving, we have 7 steps there. I'm just going to rattle these off for everyone. One is shock or disbelief. So this can be sort of that surreal feeling, not necessarily actual dissociation, but this like, how is this really happening feeling? And then denial, which is ignoring or suppressing feelings of loss, like saying I'm fine when I'm not fine, which depending on who I'm talking to, I might say that as a boundary and it could be a healthy response. But if I'm really doing it within myself, telling myself I'm fine when I'm not, that can be ultimately unhelpful. And then anger, which is not universal, but it can and does come up towards those involved and even towards oneself as well. Like I could feel angry with myself. I can feel angry with others. I feel angry towards God. Bargaining, which is making a deal of some kind. So typically this is with God or with the individual's higher power belief. And this is usually done when there's still a possibility of change in outcome. But I can definitely say that bargaining came up in my story too when I was looking at stepping back into an organization where I'm like, okay, like if I go do this, like, can you not do this? Like I talk about when I was going to walk into a church for the first time, like an actual church building. And I'm like, I'm genuinely trying to seek you, Lord. So like, can we have an agreement that you're not going to smite me when I walk in? Which might sound laughable and absurd, but like, I really thought that that could happen because that's what I had been taught since I was little. So that could be what bargaining looks like as well. And then guilt, which is tied with this sense of regret, which doesn't necessarily mean that like I wish that I had made different decisions, but it could just be that I wish different decisions had been made in general, or different actions had been taken, or different words had been said. And then depression, that's those feelings of profound sadness, like whether it's in the clinical sense of like meeting all the requirements for a diagnosis or not. It could, maybe it's clinical depression, maybe it's just like this strongly depressed feeling. And then acceptance and hope. And so this is the genuine feeling that though life may not look the same again, in fact, it probably won't. There's more life to live and there's going to be more goodness in it. These are not, like you mentioned, Kat, these are not like linear, these grief stages. Like they get all mixed up and jumbled around. Someone may not experience every single one, and they will likely revisit them. And even acceptance and hope, as much as that sounds like it's a final landing place, I have hit the place of acceptance and hope. And then I've left it again and I've come back to it and I've left it and come back to it. And so that's not necessarily like, oh, I've hit it. I'm never going to step, off
I'm
that mark
done.
again. Yeah, exactly. That's not
Yeah.
necessarily the case. So all of this, as you're probably hearing, I mean, there's a lot that goes into moving forward from a trauma. And while all of this is happening, for me personally, for a while there, I had a real struggle with what's called intentive purpose. I had a really difficult time like gathering up energy to do work, to use like some physics language. I didn't have the ability to do that. Like I was so thrown by everything and overwhelmed by everything and struggling so much that so unlike me, I mean, I just like didn't show up for work and lost a job. I was just really flaky. Is a word that would have been used about me. Like just I was not dependable. And I really struggled through that. And it had a lot to do, I mean, it had everything to do with the multiple traumas I had experienced, especially in such short succession, and not even knowing what any of that was. And so while I was going through that process, relationships were really hard. Um, they didn't have the depth, they didn't have the quality. I wasn't able to like really build and grow them. And there's still relationships where I look back on today and I just regret it because they were really beautiful people. And it wasn't that I was mean to people or that I was anything like that. It was just I didn't really show up. Like I couldn't be counted on because on any given day, I didn't know if I was really going to be able to get out of bed and function like a normal human being or not. So that was really difficult. And then I've continued as well while processing trauma, very successful in previous jobs, and actually had a therapist probably, gosh, this might have been like 7, 8 years ago when I was trying to work through some dissociative stuff that I was dealing with still. And I remember him saying like, you're so high function, like nobody would know that you're struggling with anything. Like you could literally just continue the rest of your life. Like you don't have to take this on unless you choose to. And it was a kindness of his because he knows that it can be a really difficult thing to turn toward. And so he's just kind of looking for like, what's your motivator? Because this is going to need a motivator to go through. And I just see like this difference between how I was like in my 20s. And I don't think it's necessarily an age thing. I think it's where I was at in the process that I was able to get up and do all of the things, but I still had this stuff going on inside. So I share that because any of you who are watching this, you might find that you more so lean in one direction or the other. They both can mean that you're healing from trauma, though. Like it doesn't necessarily look like I can't function. You could be incredibly functioning. Like you could be distracting like none other and knocking it out of the park. And in reality, inside you're very disconnected or you're falling apart. So it can on the exterior look different. And so Kat, I kind of wonder because, and I don't want to so much target the two interactions you've had like specifically, but even maybe from what you've seen from the trafficking world, people can be walking around looking fine and acting fine. And we can accidentally, because of that, assume that they're more fine than they are. And so that's a caution I have for those who are wanting to come alongside someone is even though they're not obviously to you falling to pieces, it doesn't mean that it's not taking incredible courage and strength for them not to be falling to pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And Naomi, something I was struck by is also a conversation that we had on our podcast a few years ago. I think it was our first podcast we did. And you had said growing up, you actually overachieved. So a lot of times when there is something going on at home with a youth, we would assume that if something is wrong, it is because, or we're going to see that as like some warning signs would be poor academic performance, when actually you and your brother excelled academically. So like you're saying, I think that I don't think that those warning signs are necessarily always going to look a certain way. And yeah, the two individuals that I had interacted with, I would consider them to be very well adjusted, owns their own business, is very involved in the community. And I almost wonder if it is almost like an overcorrection of like, see how fine I am because I've totally moved on, or I need to distract myself. What I have no idea exactly what that might mean internally, but yeah, I think it is so safe to assume, and we should not assume that that they are healed and that they're like in a place where they're absolutely fine, like you're saying. Yeah, it's safe to assume that there is something more going on beneath the surface, especially I think sometimes for the most outwardly successful, well-adjusted people, because yeah, just because you're not presenting like, hey, I need a lot of help, I think that there probably was not the ability emotionally to feel safe to express that emotion. So probably if you were involved in a religiously abusive situation and you were trying to express how you felt, I think that was probably stamped out. And so that's something that probably has been done to survive, and that has been learned, as well as you shared as a young person that is in school. I do not want to draw attention to myself. I just want to fit in. And so I'm actually going to just excel academically, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was really making me think that we should not put people in a box as far as like they need help or they don't need help or they don't need support.
Right. And it's interesting to think about as you were saying that, Kat, because there's a few different reasons that I had. And so I want to offer those up for others to see if it connects. And I had all of these at some point, and they weren't necessarily one at a time, kind of thinking about this. So there were times where it was, pretty consistently distraction was an element. And yet, part of the distraction, there were times where it was this sense of like, well, I have to like keep going. So this like sense of need, like, and people could totally have that. Like, if you need to go to work because otherwise you're going to be homeless, then it's like, okay, I'm going to distract with my work because like I have to be able to pull this off. So that can definitely be a factor as well, is this like need in conjunction with distraction. But another piece of it was I didn't know what to do with it either. Like, we can just not know what to do with the trauma and what to do with ourselves because we know that we're not the same, but we don't know exactly why. We don't know what to do with it. And so we can just, it's almost like just kind of compartmentalizing it in a way and setting it to the side. Cause like we could look at it, but like we don't know what to do with it. And so we just kind of keep going. It's like a problem that I don't know how to solve. And I'm not calling it just a problem, but like that sort of idea of like, well, we'll just circle back to that. And so we just distract because it never actually is shut off. It's like still there. And so, well, I'm going to be busy and distract and maybe, achieve because I don't really know what else to do. And so there can be a lot just to giving someone permission of, if they're excelling, that's great. But just like, it's also okay if you're not able to do that for a while. And that's a journey I've gone on of, it's okay for me not to, I'll use my 2 master's degrees as an example, it's what comes to mind to show a difference. So the year I got my master's in social work, and it was an advanced standing program because I had done what I needed to do with my bachelor's degree to be able to get a master's in 1 year with 2 bridge classes over the summer. So the bridge classes started in May. I graduated the following May. In September of that year is when my mom died. And if you're not familiar with my story, go ahead and look back at the initial videos I put out because I talk a little bit about what that was like. That talk about a complicated grief. Like, this was complex beyond what people know what to do with because it was horrific circumstances, and she wasn't supposed to die within our theology. So it was traumatic in a lot of different ways. And she had been my person, even through abuses with my dad, she had been my person. So it was a huge loss at 25 years old. And she was my 3rd loss in 3 years. My dad was the first. I had a loss in the middle, and then my mom was year 3. So it was a lot in 3.5 years total. So to go through all of that while I'm in this intensive 1-year program, guess what my GPA was? It
4.0?
was basically, it was a 3.93. I got all A's and 1 A minus.
Wow, Naomi.
That's concerning, right?
No, that's right.
But it is.
I was like, there's no way it would be a 4.0, but wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's concerning though. And I'm like, and I'm not saying that to throw shame at like anyone who has done really well. It's just, gosh, I was so not okay. And yet I was like, you know what? My dad had died right before my final semester of my bachelor's degree. And I had gotten into the top school in the country for my master's with a half scholarship, half ride. And when I went to pull out of that program, they offered me more money. And I couldn't do it because I was falling apart so much and I couldn't do it. And so I withdrew from the program just 2 weeks into the program. And I was just like, I'm not doing it again. Like, I'm going to finish this program. It's literally 3 years later and I'm going to finish this program. And so I just threw everything into it and I finished the program. This is weird. I've never talked about this. But I finished the program and yet I really wasn't okay. And so it's like, gosh, I did it differently the first time. I stepped away and I had a breather. This time I was like, no, I'm going to do it. And it caught up to me later, but I did my master's at seminary very different. Going to seminary for me was a really big deal. I'm not saying it's not for others. For me, it was a really big deal in like, partially in a redemptive way, and partially just feeling like I didn't really fit. as much as I had wonderful professors and met great friends that I still have today, just feeling like I didn't belong there in ways because of what my background was. I think we can feel tainted by that. We can feel dirtied by that and feel some sense of like shame sometimes. And so being in that environment like definitely challenged me in different ways and offered me new opportunities for healing, which was really beautiful and so precious to me. And I allowed myself to do my reasonable best through that program. I also had a baby. I was in a car accident that had a 3.5 year recovery, which included a brain trauma. And I had to like figure out how to comprehend what I was reading again. It's like, but I went through that in such a different way. And I actually don't even know what my GPA was from that one, but it was like a 3.5 ish or something, which still is like, okay, I know that's really good. But I just shared with you, like, in 1 year, I did a 3.93. I took 8 years to do that master's degree and landed
Right.
around a 3.5. It's like, I got some B's. It was like, it's fine. Is that the absolute best I could
Yes.
have done? No, I would have been capable of getting closer to a 4.0. Like, I have the ability to do that in school. This is not, I feel like this is sounding braggy. It's not. I'm trying to make a point of
I hear you.
we
Yeah.
can choose to like step back and if I had done it in 2 years, I probably would have failed because I just
Yeah.
could not. I just could not. Like, I had to do it way slower. I was way
Hmm.
kinder to myself. I was much more gentle with myself. I allowed myself to be a whole person and not just intellect. I allowed myself to have emotional needs. I allowed myself to have physical needs. And it took me 8 times the length to do the degree. And I didn't perform as well. And I feel so good about that because I came through that program more whole than I was going into it. Whereas with my first master's, I basically bled myself out.
Right. 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 And I think it's important to remember it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. And you doing it in a completely different way was part of the healing work. And it sounds like, and I want to get into walking alongside somebody a little bit too. How do we do that? How do we support somebody? And it sounds like some of that is just giving that permission. And it's interesting too, the university that when you were trying to back out of that program, they tried to offer you more money. And so just knowing too that there are academic institutions that or just like different forces in the world that again, you're looking like you're successful. And so they're trying to encourage that. They're not trying to encourage, yeah, but you're like a holistic person. You really worked on your healing. And, I think that has to come from somewhere else, that you're just able to really take the pace that you actually need and do your reasonable best, as you said. But just realizing that there might be other factors at play that are not going to necessarily encourage that. And that's why just knowing what you need and also having people around you that are trauma informed themselves, who can encourage you to set your own pace is so key. And that's why I would love to get into, as you walked through this, is there something that would have helped you, or like somebody kind of coming alongside, and what would that have looked like, for somebody to just, the ministry of presence is something I think about, and just being with somebody. But maybe sharing, like, if you had somebody like with you in that, maybe what they could have expected a little bit, like what did that healing look like for you, but also what maybe would have helped you, or even not helped you, what would have been harmful to you.
I think the biggest struggle that I've seen, and I'll include myself personally, also though, kind of across the board, from my role with beEmboldened and what I see from survivors in general, is going back to like those who don't present like they're falling apart, being overlooked. And so I want to bring it back there again, like what you're talking about, like that ministry of presence. It's huge. I'll call it companioning as well. I reference it that way a lot. I would say in like the support professional world, that's kind of the word we would use there. And so ministry of presence, companioning, it's not just being present with someone, like just being alongside them, being available, not needing to be an expert of any kind, just caring and loving and there. And there can be a lot of silence when you're in that role, a lot of just showing up and listening. and trying to support people in regards to just like having lesser capacity. Because when we're turning toward that trauma and we're trying to like move through it and we're facing all of those feelings that we have and those thoughts that we have, it really affects our bodies. Like we can get really tired. And so increased fatigue, increased difficulty with intent of purpose. Again, that ability to like gather up the motivation and the willpower and the self-discipline and all the and that literal energy to like get up and accomplish things like that can really be challenged. And so even having people come alongside in supportive ways of like, hey, I cooked and I've got leftovers. I'm going to drop off lunch for you tomorrow, or like little things like that too. Or I'll come keep you company while you're cleaning your house because you've gotten behind because you just have not been able to function properly. And let's chat or watch something funny while I help you fold laundry. I mean, just like if you have that kind of, closeness in a relationship with someone, just kind of being there and being a part of their week to week lives and not requiring people to wear it on their sleeve. That is really tough in our culture. It's really tough in our culture. I have definitely made comments to my husband before of like, it's hard. It can be really hard to get the help that's needed when you're not super dramatic about needing the help. Like if you're not bawling your eyes out and like curled up in the corner of the floor, everyone can just seem to like be walking past. And that's an overgeneralization. Everyone does not walk past. And I personally have incredible people in my life. But there can be this comparison that we can see versus people who are more expressive in that way. And that's going to have a lot to do with personality. Some people are more expressive and it's totally genuine. And then some people just aren't. And they are still having the exact same genuine need. And so I would give that big caution again for anyone who knows someone where you're like, well, they seem to be fine. They may be doing really well. I'm doing well. They also may not be doing, I'm not doing great. I'm not doing as great every day. Like I have days that are harder, but I'm like, yeah, I'm doing well. I wouldn't be doing this work if I wasn't doing well. But even doing this work and doing well overall, I've got days where it's like, whew, this is really hard today. Who are my supports that I can reach out to, and making sure we're not kind of classifying people as like, oh, this person is healed, quote unquote. So like they're done and good, like wrap it up and move on. It's like, no, we're not going to get this 100% renewed healing on the side of Jesus's second coming or on the side of eternity. Like it's not what it looks like. We're going to have different things pop up. I have no doubt that when I become a grandma someday, God willing, I will cry with tears missing my mom in a way I haven't yet, because I will be living something that she did not get to live and it will remind me of her. And I know that. And so it's not like, oh, it's just done forever and buried. Like this continues to be a part of my life and my story. And so I offer that too for people who are companioning, who want to come alongside, is knowing it could be good for 5 years and then a new stage of life is approached and now something different is coming up. Something else that's been catching me over the past few years is I was not born until my mom was 40 and I turned 39. By the time this airs, I will have turned 39. And as I'm getting closer to the age that I remember her, I can walk by a mirror sometimes and I have this jump internally because it feels like I saw her, because I look so much like her, but I'm becoming more similar as I'm getting closer to the ages that she was where I can remember her. And that is hard. It's hard. There's like a
Wow.
beauty to it, but it's hard. And so that's bringing up something new. It's bringing up like a new sense of missing her and a new sense of identifying more with like what it was like for her to like be this age and have young children and like the challenges that must have presented and things like that. And so I'm sharing this in regards to my mom, but take that idea, please, and attach it to any of these scenarios for people who have experienced abuses, who have experienced losses because of spiritual abuse. You never know when it's going to pop back up. So let's just remember that this is interwoven into them as a person and into their story. I do not say that at all to remove Jesus's redemptive work on the cross. That is 100% true and sound. Simultaneously, we do move forward with these continued needs for grace, continued needs for love and compassion. And so I would encourage everyone to remember that, no matter how someone's presenting and no matter how long it's been.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Naomi. And I think that's so many important reminders there. And, I remember too, like with the interactions that I had when the individuals laid that firm boundary that they weren't interested, there was a part of me, I was not offended because I realized that, hey, they just gave me a no. That means they feel safe enough to give a no and they feel that they are able to advocate for what they need. So to me, that was actually a good thing. So don't be personally offended, when people are able to lay a boundary. I think that's actually a good sign in a lot of ways. I did have a quick question, and I do want to get into like, yeah, what should you avoid maybe saying or doing, and like harm that can be done. But I'm curious about like, so this word deconstruction, like when people use that word, I feel like my definition of it, like I think that, or I've wondered if there is a healthy way to deconstruct. I know that you had shared on your video before as well that you had tried Reiki and different kinds of things because and maybe sharing what that was like for you, just because like you mentioned before, maybe the Bible was twisted and used against you. And so maybe you don't have that trust of scripture at that point. Or you need to go back and say, wait, how was this used and manipulated so that it would control me? That's what is the actual truth. And I don't know that that's deconstruction exactly, but for whatever that is, can you speak to that or what that looked like for you a little bit?
Well, I'll start with the deconstruction part, and it might be helpful to link to episodes that we had come out recently for those who are watching this, just to give you a bit more, because I'll only be able to touch on it briefly right now. But I had a conversation with John, who co authored a book on deconstruction. And then I had a conversation with Elisa and Tim on a book they recently had out about deconstruction. And it's a really, I think they're really good side by side conversations. So if someone's really interested in this topic, I'd encourage you to go play both of those. And again, we can link those in the caption. But basically, the point was, and where I love that Elisa and Tim came from too, because they're kind of known as being like having a really hard line with deconstruction. It's because they see a lot of the harm that it's caused. Like they spend a lot of time in that area, and they see it in a certain way. Whereas others can see it in a more positive way because they're in a different community. And so they're seeing it used differently. And so we do see some differences here. And something I really, one of the things I appreciated many things about both of these conversations. I just think all parties involved are doing wonderful work. Something I really appreciated was even with Tim and Elisa having the more like strong, harder line on deconstruction, the use of that term because it can be confusing because it is being used in different ways out there. They said that right in their book in chapter 1 towards the end, they have what I kind of reference as a disclaimer, which is them saying, if someone has experienced spiritual abuse, we do not start talking to them about what the rest of this book is going to talk about because like this is not, that was like tone deaf. This is not the conversation to be having. And I would completely agree with that. Like when we're talking about people who have experienced spiritual abuse, if they say that they're deconstructing, I would just want to know what they mean by it. And I would want to make sure that they know that some people mean really sneaky stuff with it. Like there are literally people who have come out and directly said, I'm trying to get people to leave their faith, or I did this at a church and I tried to get them to leave their Christian faith. And that was my ulterior motive. And I wasn't honest about it. I'm like, well, we've already been duped. We've already been deceived, or like whatever that was, taken advantage of, exploited. And the last thing I want is for someone with just a different goal to do the same. Because it's really the same thing. It's like you're trying to control me and you're not just being honest and letting me make the decisions. Like you're trying to manipulate me. And so I give that caution to people of just know that that does exist out there. That is very heavily how the word is being used in certain circles. And so if you follow the hashtag or something, you could wind up there by accident. And I just want you to know what the goal is so you can decide if you're on par with that goal or not. But someone who's using deconstruction and like a sort of like a disentangling, because I think of it very literally, like I'm taking the belief system I had and I'm like taking it apart and I'm seeing if there's anything to keep. And then I'm reconstructing my faith And there may be bricks from the previous or not. And I don't know how many. And so we're going to kind of figure that out. So I think when I think of it in like that very literal term of like deconstructing something, like if my son deconstructs his Lego house that he made, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But again, there's a lot of history for the word. There's different ways that it's being used. And so I think that in that disentangling sense, yeah, it can absolutely be done in a healthy way. And I think it actually has to be in order for people to feel like they are healing and they are moving forward, because healing and rebuilding go together. And we can't really move forward if we're like stuffing it all, if we're just silencing ourselves in that way. And I think something where like the rubber really met the road for me, Kat, was I realized that I just didn't have the richness of life that I wanted. And it's because I hadn't worked through some things that were going to enable me to do that moving forward. And I realized like I just didn't want that. I wanted real authentic relationships that just had like a real richness and a real depth to them. And I wanted to be a part of a healthy church. I wanted to have faith that there was one, and I wanted to find it. And now I found a bunch, which is great. They definitely exist, but like I wanted those things, and I didn't want to feel so isolated and alone. And there was just a lot I was going to have to do to be able to get there. And so, yeah, that was a lot of disentangling things, and really, it's a lot harder than starting from scratch. I'll tell you that.
Right, right. That's a that is so I really appreciate your perspective. And I think something that somebody that I consider a spiritual mentor in my life has said is just holding up the unknown, like holding something up to Jesus and saying, Jesus, I don't know so much about this. And so when you're disentangling that, just bring it to the light of God and the Lord, and asking him, because like you said, there are people out there that are desiring to take the hurt and take the confusion and redirect it to their own purpose. And basically, like you said, doing so much more harm, and doing the very same act of manipulation. So I think too, it's just like we said, there's stages of grief. And so that person, if they're not in a place where they can even like read a Bible for a while, we have to be able to support them and accept that and understand what they've been through. But hoping and praying that eventually they're able to, bring it back and realize, okay, this was a person that manipulated me. This was not God. This is not him represented. And so I think we need to represent the reality of the gospel and who God is, in a patient, loving way. Like you said, co-companioning or companioning with people. Because that's what Jesus did. He sat with people. He was just, his presence alone was able to change them, the woman at the well, for instance. And so I think, yeah, with all that, it's just, again, being with people and realizing how God has been misrepresented to them, and realizing that, hey, yeah, they might not want a book about this right now. They might not want to hear a Bible verse right now. That doesn't mean that's a never, like, that doesn't mean they'll never want to hear that. But kind of wait, I think, for them to set that pace again with kind of what we're all saying.
Yeah, it's so relational. And I know we talk about that for a lot of things, but it really is like, it's so relational. And so also just having more of that rapport, because, and I think you said a family member. So of course there'd be more rapport there. And so I just love that people were setting the boundaries. And I think you know this too from working in traffic. And it's like, well done, like good job on their
Yes,
part, right? Like setting, and well done on your part to not push it and to not be offended by it. Just be like, like, thank you for telling me, because the goal is for this to be helpful to you. And so if it's not, like, thank you for letting me know.
absolutely.
So that was just two really beautiful examples on what it can look like on both sides, on your side as well. And yeah, when people set those boundaries, I would encourage those who are coming alongside not to feel like, kind of like Kat did not, do her best not to take it offensively. We might feel a bit rejected, or we might feel even a bit like, oh my gosh, did I do something wrong? Did I? And I encourage people all the time. I'm like, go ahead and ask. Like, go ahead and ask and be like, hey, like, thank you so much for setting that boundary and for telling me. And like, was it okay though that I said that? Like, I'm just not really sure. Like, I'm not really sure how to support, and I desire to. What could that maybe look like? What maybe would look like support for you? And depending on what the person says, you may be a good candidate for that or you may not be. Depends on what they say. You may be like, well, like if I had said back in my 20s, well, really good support for me would be encouraging the fact that I'm trying to talk with the dead. And as a Christian, hopefully you would have said, absolutely not. I can't support you in doing that, Naomi. Please stop it. And that would have been fair and good. And so it can look like different things. You can have like, yes, I can do that, or no, I can't do that. Or if it's like, gosh, I just really need to talk to a professional, like, okay, well, I'm not one. And so maybe I can help you research some good people. Maybe I can see who knows who or make a referral. But, so we're going to have limitations of different kinds to give a couple examples. And I encourage people to just have like a healthy level of vulnerability, whatever that looks like for you, and sharing. And it's a humble thing too. So kind of that vulnerability, that humility, and sharing like, I don't totally know what I'm doing. And I might even listen to things like this and get equipped and have some better ideas, but you're still a unique individual here. And you might look a bit different for you. So I want to ask you, what maybe would be helpful versus maybe what would not be. And you're right, Kat. Like an answer at the time. I mean, I couldn't go to church. I couldn't really read the Bible. I couldn't. And it took years for me to really be able to, really, the church was what took the longest. I was able to read my Bible much quicker in comparison to getting back involved in a church. And yet it has happened. And it took like a decade. So, I mean, the Lord's time in comparison to our time, right? Because that wasn't my timeline either. I would have had it like done and good way faster than that. But I couldn't. I couldn't make myself be okay when I wasn't okay.
Right.
And the Lord's, I mean, a timeline for him, again, it's like just trusting in him too, that if people desire to seek him, they're going to find him and he's there. And it probably is scaring us a lot more than it's scaring him.
Yes. And I think even admitting that you don't know is going to be something that leads to further relationship and trust. And that's going to be something refreshing. Hopefully, I would think to the person who is used to a person that is, spouting scripture, and then but they will never admit their own fault or their own humanity. And so I think that actually just kind of clumsily walking through that and admitting you don't know is kind of part of the magic of relationships and part of just us in our human experience, and embracing that and knowing that, you don't have to have the answers. And I think just being kind, being present with that person and asking what they need, like you're saying, and saying, is that okay if I do ask? Like, was that all right? I think that's going to be, rather than just being so intimidated and kind of backing out and being like, well, I don't even know how to handle this because I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think just entering into that. And also, again, like, I think another thing I kind of want to ask about is like protecting yourself, because you might run into a really strong reaction that doesn't really have to do with you. I mean, maybe to a degree, but there might just be a lot of hurt that other person has gone through. And you might say the wrong thing, and or you might say the thing that triggers them. And so how do you protect, I don't know, like maintain that relationship, but also kind of protect yourself in that too?
Oh yeah. Well, and you made me think of something else that I'll mention before I jump more into that question is, yes, like we can say the wrong thing, and that's part of what I would share with someone when I'm telling them like I'm not really sure what I'm doing. And so please feel free to let me know, like kindly, like I'm going to try, and I'm probably going to like say some things and step on some things that I just don't even know. Maybe you don't even know that they're triggers right now, and you're going to find out in the moment too. And so if we can do our best to, have grace for one another through this relationship and through this companioning process. And with that kind of being our parameters, it is worse than to say nothing, because I've heard people come forward and say like, well, and I've even felt this myself. I remember back like in my 20s when I was like first kind of learning some of these things, like first trying to come alongside people professionally and being like, okay, like I don't want to say the wrong thing. And so I just am like really quiet. It's like, well, I should probably say something. And so we can have this fear of like, well, we're going to say the wrong thing. We can also have this fear of, well, the person seems to be having like a good day, or they seem to be fine. And like, I don't want to bring it up because I don't want to remind them of it. Like, I don't want to be the one who like rains on the parade if they're like fine now, or if and I'm like, just rest assured, like they have not forgotten. And so if you check in with someone, it's going to be a kindness, because what it does for the person, whether it's someone who's lost a loved one, like you could take this, apply it to like any kind of loss situation, spiritual abuse or otherwise. But what it does for the person is it gives them a really strong sense of permission for it to still be a thing and to not feel like they're supposed to be over it. And it is one of the most beautiful things that we can offer someone, is to actually initiate it. It also shows like, okay, I'm not too much. Like you're actually willing to bring this up. Like I haven't been too much so far, where you're like wanting to talk about everything and I feel like I have to, like, I don't know, filter it through and not bring it up. And because we can feel like we're too much, we can feel like people just don't know what to do with us. We can feel like we're not healing fast enough. And so it's really huge to actually initiate conversation about it, to check in. And it does take bravery to do that. And so like I commend everyone who takes that on. Don't worry about getting it perfectly. Again, if you've already shared or you're sharing in that conversation, like, I'm probably going to do some stuff wrong, but I'm trying, please let me know. Like, I want to learn. My desire is to be here. Hopefully that person is gracious to you. If they're not, and they're in a place where like they're handling it really, really difficultly because they're having like really strong triggers and things like that, then absolutely you also do need to protect yourself. And so that's something to consider too. Like, it's not for you to like totally sacrifice. Don't just sacrifice your well-being in that way where like you're getting chewed out or something. I know that there have been times where my triggers were so strong. It was like blackout strong, where it's like, I mean, it could be intense, of like the cutting words I could say and stuff like that. And no one should just be hanging around for that, particularly if there isn't an apology. So fortunately, I was able to be like, that was not okay. I'm so sorry. This is what was really happening. And I'm going to seek help, because I'm not going to let this continue. Like, obviously, like I need help. Like, I'm really not okay. And this is an indicator of it. So, different ways that can look for people. So I just want to speak to the supporter side too, of please don't feel like you have to be the sole person, that you have to be everything, or that you should be taking on all of that person's maybe strong emotions, especially if it can look like what I just shared. How can you do that in a way that is also going to be safe and healthy for you? So yeah, with what we were talking about, like basically, if someone then is getting triggered in response, or someone's either had a similar experience, or if they, because of course that can get triggered. I certainly can experience like sort of like really like mild triggers sometimes. And there's certain supports I have in place for myself for that. If something like, ooh, that way that person just said that really resonated with me. Um, I think that a first important step is just acknowledgement that it is still a thing for us. And so I had someone say to me not that long ago, she's like, I just want to be healed like you are. I was like, whoa, wait, hold on. Let's back up. Um, I'm not totally healed. Again, I already stated kind of my philosophy of that, what I think is realistic. And I think what I choose to do, that I encourage others to do as well, is that when something comes up for us, we turn toward it, we move through it. And that's what I do. So it's not that I'm like just all well and good. It's that it's going to be well and good because I'm going to continue to take things on as they surface and as I recognize them. And so in order to do that, I have to acknowledge that, oh, wow, that did affect me. And then I want to be gentle and kind with myself and seek the support, because again, I don't want to stuff it. I don't want to just distract. I know that those things have a shelf life. They only work for so long. And in the meantime, the issue is probably growing and growing and festering and like getting bigger and affecting more areas of my life. So I don't want to let that just linger for too long. And then I want to share with the other person to the degree that I'm able to do so that we have a shared understanding. So if I'm coming alongside someone else and I'm like, gosh, I'm doing that, and they responded and I just like shut down, I got really quiet. Or I think I came across maybe like a little irritable, or I don't know what my face did. Maybe you're like me and you have an expressive face. And so you're like, I don't know what my face just did right there. So to what depth am I comfortable sharing what happened for me? And it could just be really simple, like, wow, that just reminded me of something that really resonated. And so if my tone got weird or if my face got weird, I just want to let you know, like, it really is not a response to what you shared about you. It just like clicked something for me. So like, please, forgive me if any of that happened. And thank you so much for your understanding kind of deal. And so I would offer that sense of understanding back so you guys can hopefully move forward and not have that become a question in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really good points. I really loved to just talking about how you asking how someone is doing, even if they're having a good day and they're again presenting like they're fine, just to show that you don't have to be really externally not doing well for me to still care and for me to still remember as your friend that this has happened to you. And again, making space for them to lead that how they are feeling inclined and sharing what they want to share with you. And again, pausing and saying like, okay, I'm gonna maybe put a pin in this let's put a pin in this conversation if you're feeling like that person's getting really upset or triggered, like if you're able to do that as their friend. And I don't know what you would say to this, Naomi, but this is something that I have learned because of the work that I do with survivors. I would just encourage, and I don't know what you would think about this, but just somebody that has been through like things that you've been through, or just a deeply religiously abusive experience, just know that your healing is so important and your story is your story. And you don't have to, just in order to relate to somebody else. Like for instance, like when somebody else is sharing something with you, it might be bringing up something. Like share what you're comfortable. You don't have to share anything just to, what am I trying to say? Basically, it's like for a survivor of trafficking, sharing what has happened to them can be very triggering.
Right.
But I think that I have talked with survivors who feel this compulsion to share it because it's like, this horrible thing has happened to me. I'm trying to make something good with it. So I'm going to share about it so that it doesn't happen to other people. Such a noble thing to do. But I also think it's I don't want them to re-exploit themselves for the purpose of helping other people. Like to me, it's actually more important that they are okay and that they are protected. Because again, it's just another form of re-exploiting yourself, if that makes sense. I know that's like probably could be a whole nother conversation. And it's hard to explain it, but that's kind of my thought on it, is that you don't owe anyone anything. It's really between you and Jesus, and you don't have to share anything that you're not ready to share, unless you're really feeling like you want to and that you're called to do that.
Oh, Kat, I'm so glad you brought that up. And yeah, it probably could be a whole conversation. Maybe it should be. Maybe we should record again in the fall and have this conversation too, because for some people, it's going to be never. And for some people, it's just going to be a certain time frame. And even before we have a survivor tell a story on Reclamation Podcast, I mean, it really matters. Like, are they okay, to do it? Because it can offer some added bonus of healing, but I wouldn't recommend it for healing. It's too risky to put yourself out there on the internet and have whatever wackadoodle is going to comment, go ahead and comment. Like, it's just, I don't recommend it. I don't think we're kind of mitigating the risk well. And so it's for someone who is in a certain place in their healing and rebuilding journey, and who is also desiring to do that, who's like, no, it's going to give me some kind of purpose out of what I experienced that I'm looking for, and I would be appreciative. And that is additionally healing. And that to me is like, okay, that's reasonable and that is safe. Sometimes people are feeling like, okay, I went through all this, and so I'm going to start putting it all out there right away. It's like, oh, there's so much additional pain that can come through doing it too quickly. And depending on the person and the story and the person, all these things, it's like, it's just not necessarily for everyone to do it all. I wouldn't have chosen to do it outside of some very specific things that came together that made sense. It wasn't on my radar. And it's actually been through doing it that I've found it's been really beautiful to connect with so many other people. And there has been additional healing for me through that. It wasn't the plan. It's been this really beautiful addition. And so I encourage, kind of that similarity of, I would seek healing outside of the public eye, and I would seek healing outside of sharing too in depth, even one-on-one, unless the relationship has built trust to make sense of that. I didn't say that well, but basically, like, trust is arrived at. And so has the relationship arrived at the depth of trust for me to share this? I'm not going to share this in order to build the trust. I need to have the trust in order to share it. We want to flip those two.
Good.
And that is not what we've been taught if we've been exploited. We've been taught the opposite. And so we want to flip that around.
I just love that. Thank you. Because you can only go at the speed of trust. And I think that just protecting yourself and protecting other people, and just kind of giving, like, I feel like if you're in a situation and you're walking alongside somebody and you feel that they are starting to share something, what I try to do is I just try to pause. I say, can I stop you? You do not have to share this. Like, whatever you're about to say, like, it's, you know what I mean? And just kind of giving them that permission. And maybe they're like, no, I really do want to share it, but it just even interrupts that maybe thought process. And they feel like, oh, wait, I do get a choice, just reminding them of the fact that they get a choice, and being really protective of them and not asking for all the salacious details, because, oh gosh, I mean, that's like re-traumatizing. So I just feel that very protectiveness myself over people that have been in these kinds of situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, we each have a sense of agency, and we have the right to, this is a bit redundant, but we have the right to exercise it. And so I encourage all of you to do that, and to learn more about what I mean by that if it's unfamiliar to you, because it's a very important concept. And again, it's going to be a new concept for people who have been taken advantage of, who have been manipulated and exploited. The fact that you have the ability to make decisions, and they could look very different than decisions that have been made for you in the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, Naomi, I just want to say thank you so much for just kind of being vulnerable and sharing personally, like what this looked like for you, and just some real world application, I think, for those of us who, are really wanting to, again, connect and support others who have gone through these situations and often don't have the knowledge to do so, or maybe haven't had that experience. And so we don't know how to do that. And so I think some of the takeaways today are just like showing up as a human being and giving choice, and again, saying, like, I'm not going to have all the answers, but I care about you and I want to walk alongside you in this. And just sort of being like taking yourself out of that situation, like taking yourself out of the equation. And it's not really about, like, don't get offended, because it's that other person who has been through something. There may be a variety of things that come out, like aggression, or like you said, they might be really quiet. They might disassociate. And I think just like informing yourself about trauma and how it can look, fight, flight, fawn, freeze. It could look like that. It could look like many of those things. Are there any other reminders that you want to tell people listening to this conversation?
I think it's really important for us to recognize that people who have suffered in these ways, they have a narrative that they've learned. And it's not one they picked. They're not negative. They're not pessimistic. They're not any of those things. They have been shown in real life, in real time, like, this is what it looks like. And we can be told all day long that it can look different. And we can know philosophically that it can look different. But to really heal from trauma and move forward, we need to see the difference. That's what really links it for us and really starts to entrench it in our brains, in our nervous system, for us to know, okay, not only can this look different, but I've seen it look different. And that is a very important experience to have. And in the trauma-informed world, it's called a corrective experience. And it's basically like it corrects the narrative, it changes the narrative to a healthy narrative. As in, it doesn't change the narrative they already, the experience they have, but it changes the ongoing overall, like, enduring narrative that they have about the whole world at large, or their subset, say the church, for example, or family, for example. And so we have the opportunity to be that corrective experience for people. We have the opportunity for it to be different for them because we are going to be different with them. And all of this stuff that we've talked about today can help you be that. no, it's not like, oh my gosh, I have to be the corrective experience. And so I have to get it all right. No, I just have to be honest that I don't know. Just have to be willing to be humble and say, I don't know. And I have to be willing to show up and try and learn and all of those things. Like that's what's really important. And then we have the opportunity to still love and still show up and still ask, even if they haven't said anything in a week, like I can ask and they can be like, wow, like they don't mind. It's not like I talked about it too much. Like they're still here. And we can recognize that we ultimately don't heal people. I don't heal people. Jesus ultimately is the healer. I don't heal people. And yet I can be a part of a healing process for someone. And I can also be a part of the harming process for someone. And so I do take it seriously enough that I want to learn more, that I want to be humble. I want to be vulnerable again, in a way of like sharing, I'm not sure, and taking feedback and navigating this and seeking support for myself. And that's something else we love doing at beEmboldened is we come alongside people who are coming alongside people. And we absolutely love to do that. We have more trainings and things coming down the road that are in the works. And so I'm excited to offer more of that. But we already do it through our mentoring. We come alongside family members and help them and how they support in the conversations they're having, different barriers they're experiencing. And so seek that out, whatever it looks like, whether it's reading a book or listening to podcasts or talking with your network of people or seeking out a support professional. Just we do have a responsibility, I think, and we do in being a part of that healing journey in the best way that we can. And so I hope that we all do take it seriously. And how can I do that? How can I come alongside others while combining that with we don't ultimately heal? We can take all the pressure off and knowing that there are people out there who instead cause further harm. And so we're going to continue to learn more so that we don't accidentally do that. And if we do, we're going to own it. And we're going to say we're sorry. And we're going to seek to understand how to do it differently next time. And there's so much grace for that. So for all of you who are out there just in it, saying, I'm going to give it my best and I'm trying and I'm learning, and just bless you, because it's not all that we come across as survivors. That is not exclusively what we see. And so I am very, very grateful to each and every one of you who has listened to this podcast episode all the way through and who is desiring to love others well, who have had such experiences. Just thank you. Thank you for being here. I cannot do it alone. We cannot do it alone. And we're not all doing it perfectly. We need everybody out there that we can get. So happy to be of help if we can be. Please feel free to reach out.
That's great. Yeah, just something that quick, like I just wanted to share that struck me. But no, I really appreciate this conversation. And I think that kind of going back to how relationships that were broken were the source of, it's really, that's really the cause of so much of the hurt that has happened is broken trust and broken relationships. And so healing that is also going to take a healing relationship, and there is the potential for further harm or healing. So yeah, I mean, we're all, and again, we're all in this together. And I'm so grateful for beEmboldened for existing, and Naomi for the work that you're doing and just creating so many resources that are like this. And yeah, if you're watching this and you have a specific question, just reach out to us, because we have a whole team that Naomi is such an integral part of. And we just want to, take your questions and kind of let's mold them over together and find collective solutions to these things. But again, knowing that we're not responsible ultimately, it's got to be God, it's got to be Jesus. So that takes a lot of that pressure off.